Tuesday morning at a little bit around 10 a.m. And we've got a lot going on in the world. We've got some amazing guests that'll be coming on as well, talking about a number of things taking place, including one that is definitely in the space of international relations and all along those lines. But first, let me get to some things that are happening in the world. Definitely, we are seeing that Hamas has freed two Israelis, and the U.S. is being cautious on the Gaza invasion. And definitely, we're seeing the Gaza tolls mount as Israel is intensifying its strike. And French President Macron is visiting Israel in a solidarity visit. So he is also proposing an international coalition against Hamas. So that is something else that we are seeing. And of course, we also have that war going on between Ukraine and Russia. And there was new news that was developing in that space, because it looks like possibly Russian President Vladimir Putin has suffered a heart attack, and there are reports that he was found lying on the floor. So that is something else that we are seeing. And of course, the Kremlin is laughing off rumors that President Putin has been using a body double. So that is something else that we are seeing in the news items and all along those kind of situations. Hamas has proven Israel right on the Gaza hospital blast, and that is definitely something else that we are seeing. And even our own publications, like the New York Times, has admitted its errors in the Gaza hospital report. So definitely that is something else that we are seeing in the news. And over in China, they have removed Li Shangfu as their defense minister. So that is definitely something that is going on, as they have reportedly ousted that defense minister after a 2-month absence. So that is something else that we are seeing in the news as well. And it looks like 13 law enforcement officers were killed in an ambush in Mexico, at least 24 dead, including 12 police officers in southwest Mexico. So we are seeing that, and apparently that was a ambush that was perpetrated by drug gangs and all in that kind of way. And the U.S. says that Iran is actively facilitating attacks on bases in the Middle East. So that is something else that we are seeing. Intelligence shows Iranian-backed militias are ready to ramp up their attacks against U.S. forces in the Middle East. And in other news, the Russians sent 3 brigades toward Avdiivka, and just 2 came back after they sent 3 in that general direction. And women in Iceland are going on strike for a day to protest pay gap and violence. So even the prime minister of Iceland will be joining that particular protest that is apparently over gender equality. So that is something else that we are seeing in the news as well. And Jamie Dimon and other top bankers are visiting Saudi Arabia as the Israel-Hamas war continues to rage on, and all in that space. And definitely China is urging Israel to abide by international law and protect civilians in the Gaza area. So that is something else that we are seeing as well. And actually, the Qatar Emir says that Israel should not be given a free license to kill in Gaza. His exact quote was, "Enough is enough," and he was taking aim at Israel's backers, and he said that they shouldn't get unrestricted okay to kill. And he also quoted that the international community is acting as if Palestinian children are worthless. And Secretary Blinken is to host a visit by the People's Republic of China and one of their top diplomats. So we'll see how that all plays out as well. So that is something that we are seeing in the news. Of course, people sometimes pay attention to the weather as well. So they're tracking the tropics. A newly named Tropical Depression 21 is set to make landfall in Central America. So we are still in the middle of that particular season as well. And some of the networks are reporting the readout of President Biden's call with Prime Minister Netanyahu of Israel. So that is something else that we are seeing in the news as well. I'm going to get to a couple of things in the United States news, and then we'll bring in our special guests. Actually, we've got two of them, but we bring in Patricia first because she's definitely got some thoughts around international affairs and all along those lines. So looking forward to hearing what she's got to say. And by the way, the House Republicans are gathering to pick their third speaker nominee because apparently there's been an ouster of McCarthy. So they're to hold a third internal vote to find a speaker candidate 3 weeks after McCarthy had been ousted. I think that Patrick McHenry doesn't necessarily want the job, and he is somebody from here in North Carolina. So I guess they're going to try to figure out who the third candidate will be, and who knows, maybe they'll convince Mr. McHenry to join and all in that kind of way. So we're going to be very interested to see what happens in that regards. And Trump 2020 lawyer Jenna Ellis has pleaded guilty in the Georgia election case. And apparently that's one of the latest folks that is flipping in those cases and all along those lines. So we're going to see how that plays out as well. So definitely could be some interesting comments there. And one of our former presidents has made some interesting comments as well. Obama is warning that Israelis' actions in Gaza could backfire. So he says that any military strategy from Israel that ignores human costs could ultimately backfire in that space. And Trump is filing new challenges to the federal election obstruction cases that exist in D.C. And apparently he's also making some comments about the new Mitt Romney biography as well. So definitely that'll be interesting to see what goes on in that space. And maybe some folks will have some thoughts around that as well. And apparently a U.S. state senator, Jeff Wilson, was arrested in Hong Kong for having a gun in his carry-on bag. So that is something else that we are seeing as well. So like I said, there are a number of things going on, including a possible shutdown, because the government shutdown is back in the news as that deadline is nearing, as the GOP is continuing to struggle to elect that new speaker and all along those lines. So like I said, there's a lot going on in the world and with world politics and world issues and all along those kind of lines. So definitely there's a lot happening, and we're interested to hear what folks have got to say. But right now I'm going to bring in my very special guest, that being Patricia Gennaro, and all along those lines. And I've got some other guests as well. And of course, we've got our regular panel. But Patricia, I know that you've been involved in a lot of these international affairs. You do a lot in the Middle East. You've definitely done a lot with conflict resolution and a number of other things. I guess the first question I've got to ask you is, can we ever have peace in these areas and all along these lines? Because you have definitely done some amazing work. You've had some work in New York. You've had a number of work in other places, and I know you've even worked in the Balkans as well. So what is your thoughts around this, and tell folks where you're currently working in the sense of politics and also your sense of where we are in the world.
Well, that's a big. I could write a book on all those questions to tell you the truth. But I'll start with peace in the Middle East and peace around the world, and I think that yeah, it can happen. Okay, but there's a lot involved in this. Nothing is ever black and white, and I believe it's been such an ongoing historical issue within the context of the Middle East that has a lot to do with ideology. And when we get into ideologies, we often get very emotional. And when we're emotional, this is what we're seeing now in a lot of cases, specifically in, when we're reading social media and the like, they hit emotions of people. And when your emotions start getting hit, your critical thinking goes out the window. So you no longer think very rationally. I mean, we all know I have an Italian background, Italian Irish, put those two together and you have tons of emotions going on. But I think a lot of times we need to check ourselves and ask what kind of world we want to live in. And I would think that a large percentage of the population on this planet does not want to live in constant war. Unfortunately, we've had a system that has perpetuated that, and it continues to do so. So I think we're seeing people that are getting involved in more peace initiatives, thought-provoking initiatives, and longevity initiatives, which means we have to think about how we're all going to live on this planet. And but unfortunately, a lot of times those are not the people that win the arguments. So it still can we still continue to see a lot of conflict and unrest.
Yeah, no doubt about that. If you could just tell, as I said earlier, and I know a little bit about it, but our audience doesn't, your own background, because like I said, you've been doing this work for a number of years in the sense of doing work with a number of diplomats. I know that there was even a time, because I was going to ask you about your opinions of a former first lady, because I do know that you had some experiences with Hillary and all along those lines. But if you can just share a little bit about your own work in the diplomatic lanes.
Yeah, well, yes, I've been in this work a long time. I started out, working and studying international affairs years ago. I don't want to talk about how old I am, but I worked as a professor in international affairs, national security policy, and civilian and military affairs for a very long time at New York University. I believe that I try to keep myself nonpartisan. Some issues are here or there, so sometimes it's difficult to do that depending on which issue we're talking about. But I think it's really important for us to get ourselves out of partisan issues and think more critically about situations. I've been an advisor for officers in the military for some time, probably since the start of the war in Afghanistan. I've worked with many four-star generals, diplomats, interagency partners to help work out a lot of the extensive, complex and compound problems we have and have to manage with so many players in a lot of these areas. In Afghanistan, for one, I mean, look at how many players we've had in Afghanistan. It was a complete international coalition, a lot of international agencies and NGOs and the like. So, I mean, it's been a long time not only studying and looking at world history and world problems that need to be looked at and policy needs to be formed from a U.S. perspective and interest to them, but also how do we engage better and work harder on a diplomatic level so we prevent conflict and we prevent these rushes into war and these kinds of incidents. So, I mean, I think guilt is on both sides of most conflicts and most problems. So, we need to understand history, understand how people feel in different perspectives, and help really try to understand how we can manage things to make a better world for people and a better place. And and I think that's sometimes where we miss. It's like, get those bad guys. Yeah, but just getting those bad guys is not exactly the answer all the time. And it's a lot of time easier said than done.
One of the things I was curious about, and you kind of alluded to it and everything, and we were actually talking about it on Economics Monday with the Honorable David Walker and all along those lines. But do you think that there is a concrete U.S. policy and in that kind of way? Because it does seem like we are kind of hit and miss. I know that there's been conversations around BRICS, which is this new alliance and everything that is involving Brazil, Russia, they believe India is part of that, China, and a number of other countries, definitely South Africa and everything. So do you think that we have a concrete plan? You study international affairs, and I was wondering if you think that there is a concrete plan, or are we missing the boat in that sense?
Well, I definitely think we have plenty of smart people that are in the State Department and the Defense Department and et cetera. I think the problem is that we don't have a concrete plan. We often don't have a greater strategy or vision. We often work very systematically on an operational level. We respond to things often at ad hoc. And I think, but let me just back up for a minute. I think one of the major problems with the US plan and strategy is that after the fall of the Berlin Wall and the dissolution basically of the Soviet Union and no longer having a Cold War, our policies often remain the same. So they really haven't shifted or changed since that time. So we continue, and I mean, I think people often are happy to almost think that they're back in this Cold War kind of dynamic because it makes them more comfortable. But that certainly is not where we are as a country. It's not we are as global players and global citizens here. And I think what happens is when you have these large scale bureaucracies, you have and such dynamic partisanship, which we have right now, which I haven't seen in a very long time, but you just can't change. And the changes that the extremes want, you can call it left, right, whatever, but I think that what we're dealing with are very extremes on both sides. When you have that, there's no compromise because people don't believe that they don't, first of all, they don't want to compromise. And second of all, they don't think that compromise is something that makes them move farther in making the U.S. stronger instead of weaker. And I think we're seeing a lot of weakness right now.
And along those same lines, I know that you have worked both in Afghanistan and other places when there have been war-torn areas in terms of getting them back into the being a more structured kind of country. So definitely doing some of the rebuilding. I know that you did some of that work in Afghanistan. You've done it in other places. I want to say the Balkans as well and everything. So a lot of times we think about all the money that goes into war, but after the war is over, you have to rebuild those countries. I think about Japan, I think about Germany, and I think about a number of other places. So are we prepared to rebuild once these wars are done? And how are you feeling that we have done in the past, even with Afghanistan? Because in some ways it seems like we might have bred some of these terrorists by some of our actions as well. But I was just wondering your thoughts around that.
Well, I don't think it's our responsibility to rebuild, and that's something that we need to think about. And in Western nations, it's much different than Eastern nations. Our cultures are much more aligned. I think that a lot of the problems come when a Western nation decides to rebuild an Eastern nation and tell it how it should behave. They've been along a lot longer than we have. They've been around. Their history goes much deeper. It's like someone coming in your house and telling you how to run it. It's really not comfortable, and it's not the way that you want to do things. So, I mean, I think I go back to that old concept of you really can't change or help people unless they want that to happen within the context of who they are. And, sometimes I just think that Americans need to think about themselves and how they would feel if the change, if the shoe was on the other foot, right? So if you came into my country in Afghanistan, I'm not so sure I would welcome you. Do I want my life to be better? Yeah, I do, but I need for you to help me to understand how that's possible. If you just come and tell me what to do, that's a very difficult thing. Even with our 2-year-olds, right? We tell a 2-year-old, this is what you should be doing. And they kind of look at you funny and go, ha, and until they start to grow and see and learn that there's other possibilities and other opportunities for them and their behavior. And if their behavior is a certain way, what they can do. In a lot of countries that I've worked with, we know corruption is quite high. People will pay off or do this or do that. And a lot of times I'll say, well, if you participate in corruption, let's look at what that means on the larger picture, right? And so until you can think about that within that context, you really don't know how it's hurting you or not. So these are some of the situations I think we have to think about and decide whether or not that's the decision and policy we want to make. And I think the second part is, and I'll go back, we're not ready for these changes in the global environment. We've never been good at rebuilding nations. I think we would have learned that by now. We can go back to Korea, Vietnam, and so on. We haven't gained those skills yet. And part of it is our own internal cooperation with each other and planning with each other. And part of it is just, sometimes people just don't want to be rebuilt. And, I understand that there are definitely threats in that, but there are ways that I think that we need to think about managing them in a different way.
No, that makes a lot of sense. And speaking of people not be ready to be rebuilt and all along those lines, one of the things we've been discussing on this network and just in general is this idea of some of our college kids. I know that even with the Israel and Palestine conflict, there have been a number of protests that some people are feeling that the students are shouting some very toxic things to the Israel community and to other communities as well. And you are at New York University. I know that there have been some pushbacks around some of the protests that have gone on by the students. I've always been a fan of student conversation because I think that college kids, this is when they learn about a number of things, including world affairs and world issues. But I just wanted your take on these conversations, and are we given enough credence to what the kids are saying in this conflict and the Ukrainian conflict and a number of other conflicts? There are even conflicts going on in Africa and other parts of the world as well.
Yeah. Well, this is a long-standing issue in the United States, and I think it's a longer-standing issue in the United States with Israel, is because it's almost part of our central system. It's part of our I want to say our everyday dynamic. It's in the newspapers every day. We hear about it every day. We've been one of the countries that were initially very supportive of creation of the state of Israel. So sometimes I think when you make a decision, even though it's a long time ago, you don't know how to go back and say, perhaps that decision wasn't the best one that I made, and now what do I need to do about it? The second part of that is, the Israeli lobby has been very strong in the U.S. and it's dominated the media, the narrative over many, many years since the inception of the state. And the conflict didn't start on October 7th with the attack of Hamas. It started in the 40s, okay, when Israel decided to colonize this area. And I think that what's happening and the demonstrations that we're seeing and the pushback that we're seeing in the Jewish community as well here in the United States very strongly is because people are starting to realize that this is not a sustainable way of creating a state. And they're also starting to realize that it is a systematic system of marginalization of a certain part of the population, which is not quote unquote Jewish. So when we look at American values, for me, it's very difficult in my upbringing as an American, is that whatever religion you want to have, you have. You go and along your life, and I go along my decisions in life, and we learn to respect each other. We learn to respect each other in different ways. So unfortunately, we're seeing a lot of that change, which frightens me and keeps me up at night often. But when you go back, and I'll go back, when you look at ideology, it separates societies and it makes people different instead of a human being. So people are realizing that Palestinian voices have been quelled over the years. They are suffering. I've been there. I've seen the situations there. It's heartbreaking. It's heartbreaking when you can see a little Israeli child learn how to ride a bike and a little Palestinian child is being put in his house because they decided they're building a settlement next door. It's very, very heartbreaking to see one side living a wonderful, free life while the other side is confined to territories, checkpoints, certain types of taxes, limited amounts of resources, and et cetera. And I think people are finally starting to see this, and it doesn't sit well with them, as it shouldn't. No one in this world should be marginalized or be treated like they're not human. And I think we need to get to that space.
And along those same lines, I was curious because you definitely have had some thoughts around both the Balkan area as well as Latin America and a number of other things. And one of the things we were talking about on one of our other shows, I might have been Economics Monday, was this notion of human rights and whether the U.S. should interfere in countries that are having human rights violations, whether that's around LGBTQI rights or whether that's around other things that are in the society as well. So I do know there has been a notion of America as kind of of the police or the social police and all along those lines. But I was just wondering your thoughts. Is that something that we should be concerned about? Because I know that even in some African nations, there are some very strong anti-LGBT laws and all in that space. And sometimes we want to interfere, and maybe we shouldn't interfere. But I was just wondering your thoughts around that, because there is definitely one of our regular panelists, he's not here today, that was actually saying that maybe we should be interfering in some of those human rights issues. But I'd love to hear your thoughts around that as one that has worked in this field.
Well, it goes back to change, right? And I think we need to take a hard, good look at ourselves before we start judging other people and intervening in other people's affairs. I am an avid supporter of human rights, of people being allowed to be who they are. We have laws against criminal activity. We have laws against killing and all of those things, and I highly agree with that. But we really have to think about how our own behavior supports our own policy. So if we want to have LGBT policy in Kenya, for example, or the Congo, or wherever these things are happening, we need to have the same policy here. And what we're seeing right now is not that policy. I think we're compromising some human rights here in the United States. So how are we supposed to be able to tell other people? Now, the second half of that, which I will stress, is that arms sales. We are the largest seller of arms in the world, and I highly agree with the Leahy laws that if the countries are committing atrocities against minorities or other parties, that we should not be selling them arms. If they want to go get arms somewhere else, let them. But that is not who we are as Americans. And quite frankly, that, I think we should stand up for those values and those beliefs. Ronald Reagan was the first president to stand up against the Israelis when there were atrocities that continued to be wielded there that were happening then, and he stopped sales there for some of the weapons. And we didn't even have Leahy laws then. So I think that, we really need to think about this as a society when we see civilians and children. And I mean, I'm all for, for going after criminals. I don't, but if you're using children as human shields, as they say, even let's just say that's true, or it's not, but if it's true, in mafia days, they wouldn't blow up the car if there were children in the car, right? So I think that we really need to think about how we're perpetuating these kinds of relationships with different parties and different people who seem to separate themselves. It goes back to the basics that we are all human first. So until we understand that, culture is all, religion, all of those things come after. We are all human first, and until we start understanding that, we're going to have a lot of this kind of, I don't care that I'm killing children. I mean, how can anyone say that? And one person's children doesn't matter any more or less than another person's. I think they're both quite valuable, and this is where we have to be as a society. It's the 21st century, for Christ's sake,
Makes a lot of sense. And I had mentioned earlier about Iceland and what the prime minister was doing there in terms of women's rights. So I was just wondering your thoughts around that. And are you seeing some women leaders around the world that are taking stances even around gender equality? Because I know that there was a prime minister even in New Zealand. Some people liked her, some people did not like her, because she was definitely a liberal leader that has now been out of office. But I was just wondering your thoughts, because I'm sure that even this Iceland president, that is a very small country, might get some pushback for supporting gender equality and all along that line. But I was just wondering your thoughts as a woman and a woman academic, if you are seeing more of our leaders deal with some of these gender issues, even on a global scale.
Well, I like to see some people, again, address some gender issues here. I'm a woman in national and international security, and I can't tell you how many times I'm the only woman in the room. I cannot tell you. So, and sometimes, when I ask for a salary, which I think I deserve, they're like, well, aren't you married? And I'm like, so does that mean you don't need to pay me? And so things like that have happened in my own life. So I am very supportive I know there are problems, and I know there are steps, again, that people need to take in order to manage this properly. Again, it's an emotional issue sometimes for men in patriarchal societies in particular, because they don't understand why women should be doing things, right? Um, but we're 50% of the population. We have a lot to contribute. We have a lot of value. We have worked very, very hard, and I don't think anybody has any problem with men. The problem is that we need to be treated and paid accordingly. And I applaud these women for speaking up. They've done it before in Iceland. We've done it here. They've made quite significant strides there with payment and treatment. But it continues to be a problem, especially with the violence, as you had mentioned earlier in the beginning of your statements. And again, I'll go back. Violence is never an acceptable answer to most issues. In fact, I'm a firm believer that it causes more problems. What happens when you hit someone, right? They hit you back. What happens when you're kind to someone? They're kind back. So, I mean, I'm not saying that you don't stand your ground when you're being taken advantage of or any of those things. I think that's quite important. But often violence has to be the last resort.
Well, I know that our founder is here and we've got other people, and I'm going to bring on some of the guests, but Nick Palveda, one of the things he talks about regularly and everything is this notion of education, and even Lee Newton Rhodes, who is with us as well, talks about that as well. So I was wondering, do you feel that we are learning enough about international relations and international situations, even in our school system? Because I remember when I was in school, we definitely studied some of the things going on in Africa. We studied some of the things going on in Asia and a number of other parts of the world. I don't have any kids of my own, but I do have two nephews, and I'm not even sure that they would know the capitals of some of these countries and some of the other things that are going on in our world. And I know that New York is definitely a very international city and all along those lines. But I was just wondering your thoughts as to whether we are doing a good job in terms of teaching about these world affairs. And like I said, I'm going to bring in, we've got one of the guests, but I'm going to bring in Sasha Starr, who's in there in Canada and is very much a pro Ukrainian and definitely involved in a number of other things as well as a chess master and all along those lines. And I'm hoping that Nick will come on camera as well, and Lee Newton Rhodes also. But definitely your thoughts around the education system.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think the first thing in the US is we don't encourage, right? We don't encourage another language. We don't encourage broader thought. We don't encourage critical thinking. I mean, I'm here in Florida right now, and we have legislation that we're not allowed to teach certain things, and they're putting, they want to put cameras in teachers' classrooms to make sure that we don't teach about, the history of slavery in this country, or and I find that very, very scary. And the reason is because if you don't understand your history, you do not understand why people react the certain ways that they do. They respond certain ways that they do. They work with you and then interact with you certain ways that they do. So if you don't understand that person's history, culture, kind of where that they came from, or those societies and groups of people, you are already at a disadvantage when you're interacting. And this was true with our situations, definitely in Korea and Vietnam, and it was also very, very true in Afghanistan. I think it's one of the reasons we found ourselves at a disadvantage every single time. There's a much broader picture to that, but we really didn't understand the dynamics of the Afghan people, who they were in the historical context of why they behave and do and respond to things the way that they did. And we've gotten trampled because of that. So I think we should be prouder as a nation that we are educated, that we know, that we're knowledgeable. It's almost, I mean, when we went through the John McCain, and I'll stop after this, Sarah Palin situation, it was almost, and often this happens in international affairs too, it's looked down upon that you are an educated person or from, and I find that hard in America, because I think we should celebrate. People don't want to go to school. They don't want to read a book. They don't want to get to the next level. You don't have to go to Harvard and get educated. There's so many ways. We have free libraries and so many things at our fingertips. But being excited about knowledge is where I think that disconnect comes in.
Just really quickly, and I know Nick's probably got some questions, as does Sasha, but I mentioned earlier that you've had the pleasure of working with some major diplomats. You mentioned definitely Reagan. You definitely mentioned, as I said earlier, Hillary and everything. So I was just wondering, Hillary Clinton, that is, what is some of the things that you have learned the most from some of these folks, whether it is five-star generals or from some of the diplomats and politicians that you have worked with? Because one of the other things that we talk about on this show is the divisive nature of our own country and how there's a lot of division around race, ethnicity, and a number of other things. But I just wanted your take on this and just your take on some of the political figures that you have worked with.
Well, I mean, most of the top generals and diplomats are some of but I would say the diplomats and former ambassadors to me have imprinted a lot of really good lessons. And those lessons are, again, I'm going to go back to understanding the history of where you're working, the countries and the people you're dealing with. Really do your homework about, who they are, where they come from, all of those kinds of things. Find value in them and find places of common ground. Often I'll just say, oh, I see you're an art collector, or by the way, I find you really like music or something. And it finds ways for you to get commonalities and figure out kind of that warmness and give them an opportunity to show you who they are. And I find that it's engagement and doing things with other people, and especially when you have multiple personalities and cultures in the room, you have to be patient. You have to be really dedicated. You have to be willing to compromise, and you have to really be willing to listen. And because there are always nuances in the way people express themselves. I'm a New Yorker. We call it like it is. Your hair looks funny today, whatever. But if you're going to China, for example, you might not want to say that. So you might want to say, so what's your name? I didn't understand your name. Can you repeat it to me? Can you, and I heard you have a family, and just kind of learn how to engage and then listen to nuances based on not only what you've learned and studied about the country, but what you have to learn today and at the present time for whatever kind of negotiations or engagement you're trying to move forward there.
Along those same lines, and I'll say that Steve's with, and he's usually the regular anchor and all in that space. But one of the things we've talked about is this division in our country, particularly even on the Republican and Democratic side. And I was just wondering your take around that, because as Steve has said, he does remember a time that people would work across the aisles, and we're not seeing a lot of that working across the aisles. It's a lot of Hakeem Jeffries versus whoever the Republican leadership is, and all along those lines. But I was just wondering your thoughts around that, and is there a way that we can get around some of this divisive politics that is going on?
Well, I worked for Ted Kennedy as an intern and a fellow a long time ago. It was my first. I just wanted to get on the Hill because I wanted to learn. And when Senator Kennedy's staff was ready, said, come on, I was like, all right, whatever I can learn, because again, we don't know how our government systems work a lot of times. And this is an education problem as well. People don't know the dynamics about how Congress works. So I just wanted to learn. And at that time, we had Orrin Hatch and Ted Kennedy, and they were like jockeying in some meeting or something. But behind the scenes, they were all sitting down and trying to make compromises on how to help and move the country forward. And I don't think, although lobbying money was pretty high then, I'm not sure it was this intense and this high as it is now. I also think they were very personality driven, which every member of Congress, almost every member of Congress seems to be these days. And that worries me. So when people say what keeps you up at night, I'll tell you, it's Washington and it's Congress, because if we as Americans can't learn to respect each other, no matter our differences or similarities, how do we expect to engage and interact with the rest of the world? And I think we're seeing those problems right now. So, we need to either find new ways to get really good people.
Yeah, it's so great to have you back, Patricia.
Or work for our country, or stop. Go ahead, please. I'm sorry.
Mark, you also have somebody waiting backstage.
Okay, yeah, I'm here to get them as well.
Okay, just let you know.
Yeah.
Hey, Patricia, I'm Nick.
Nick.
What city in Florida are you in?
Patricia, it's great to have you here. Sorry I was late.
Oh, Steve's up. You're going to be.
Hi, Steve.
What city in Florida are you in right now?
Oh, sorry. Yeah. Well, hey, I'm sorry I was late. I was waiting on the wrong link, but I didn't get to open up today. But yeah, I think there's a lot going on in the world, today with Hamas and the war. But we thank you for sharing your insight. And I've often said, and I really believe that the United States today is a dysfunctional superpower. I think that we don't have a Congress. We're so divided. We're so polarized. We're not able to come together as a nation and make the investments we need to make to build our nation and to also. When we're divided. Analysts say that we're more divided than we were during the Civil War, which is hard to believe, but I'm starting to really see that myself. Part of it's the media, the indoctrination, the technology, which connects us, but also makes us feel more comfortable to stay within our own lanes and post what is politically correct, playing the extremes of each party, the money and finances as well. A U.S. Senate race, and if Governor Roy Cooper will run for the Senate or whoever runs, that's a lot of money. I mean, $2 billion, 2000 for federal elections. Now it's $16 billion. So, that's hurting the U.S. And then I would say internationally, what's happened is this whole notion. I think President Biden did state it well in his address to the American people last week that it's really about democracy versus autocracy. And these countries are just invading others, and there's a lot at stake. I mean, if Russia is successful in Ukraine, then what's going to prevent someone else from coming in? Whether it's a Taiwan or an Iran. Food for thought, macro political macro level. Looking at it, I think it's. I don't know whether we're going to get through this patch, but it's definitely a rough one, and makes it a good, but gives political commentators a lot of opportunities to talk about it. So, thank you.
Yeah, what's your thoughts, Patricia, around that? He mentioned the whole notion of autocrats, and there are definitely a number of autocrats that are out there and all along those lines. And definitely we know that Putin is an autocrat. There are a number of other autocrats, and there's also been a push around the world, I would argue, around nationalism and being proud of your own nation and everything. But I was just wondering your thoughts around both of those issues.
Yeah, I mean, I said I think that things are very personality driven now, and that's a pretty glaring sign of autocracy, right? If you go around the world, you'll see that people run a lot on personality. They don't really run on ideas or future or stability or making life better. People are voting them in for personality driven issues. And I think we've seen that, unfortunately, with Donald Trump. I really kind of wish he just stayed where he was. But as a former New Yorker, I saw a lot of the shenanigans he was doing there. And no matter what your policies are, I think he's very personality driven. He's elected on that. And he tried to stay into office. And there are a lot of people in this country who have supported that. And that to me is a little frightening based on how this country has grown to value democracy, even though we're kind of a federalist system more than a democratic system. And I think it's time for us maybe to think about that. When was the Constitution written? So long ago, and we value that, right? But that was 200 years ago plus. Like if somebody made something for me 200 years ago, I don't think I want to see it now. Am I using the same wheel on the car? No, we've made it better. So now we don't get as many accidents, or we can drive in snow, or all of these things. So, it may be time for us as a nation, but in this situation and the divisiveness we're in, it is frightening. It's frightening. We have large-scale global economic compound problems we're looking at in Israel and Ukraine, and with the climate, et cetera, et cetera. And we have a bunch of people up there, saying, I'm better than he is. I have guns and he doesn't. I have this and he does. I mean, I feel like I'm in kindergarten sometimes.
Thank you. My red button's bigger than your red button.
Right, exactly.
That's
And
what
this
he
was
said
on
at the
campus.
last,
Yeah, that's what Kim
speech.
says all the time and everything. Just really quickly, I wanted to bring in because he does have some background in a number of things, including being a member of the Jewish Society, but he's also very much pushing the notion of vegetarianism or veganism and all along those lines. But Richard, if you could share a little bit about what you're doing and all in that space. We've also got Richard Schwartz with us, and I know that he's been doing a lot of work in that lane and is definitely an advocate for us having a better eating system. And like I said, he is a member of the Jewish community as well. So Richard, if you'll just share some of your insights as well, and then we'll continue with some of the dialogue and questions also.
Okay, many thanks for the opportunity. Yeah, Richard Schwartz, President Emeritus of Jewish Veg, and author of a number of books. I'll just show one of them. It's Vegan Revolution, Saving Our World, Revitalizing Judaism. And I'm really promoting veganism not only because it's so important for the individual health, but really, as the panelists probably all know, the world is so threatened by climate change today. And, we're seeing that all the time. All the previous 4 months, June, July, August, September, broke records. World's definitely heating up, and it seems almost every day there's reports about floods and droughts and wildfires, etc. And what I'm promoting is the idea that there's only one possible way to avert a climate catastrophe, and that's through a major shift toward plant-based diets. And we give two very important reasons for that. And one is that cows and other ruminants emit methane, and that's a greenhouse gas that's over 80 times as potent as carbon dioxide in heating up the atmosphere. During that 10 or 15 years that methane's in the atmosphere. And more important than that is as we speak, trees are being destroyed in the Amazon rainforest and other places to create grazing land and land for growing feed crops for animals. And actually, in all the years of animal agriculture, over 43% of the ice-free land is used for grazing of cows and other farmed animals and for growing feed crops. And because of that, we're losing the sequestering or absorbing power of those trees. Carbon dioxide in the atmosphere has increased. It was 285 parts per million at the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. It's gone up to 420 parts per million, way above the 350 parts per million that climate experts believe is like a threshold value. And unfortunately, it's increasing 2 or 3 parts per million per year. So it looks very bad for future generations. I mean, we've seen, as I mentioned, all the severe climate effects. That's due to an increase of about 1.2 degrees Celsius since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. And that's projected to go up to possibly 3, 4, 5 degrees Celsius. So it may seem like
and everything. Hey, Richard, just really quickly, I know that you wrote a paper sometime back and everything, because definitely you are a rabbi and you've definitely done a lot discussing the veganism, and you're definitely a member of the Jewish community, as I definitely said earlier. And I know that you wrote a paper at one point. I'd love to hear you explain that, but it was a paper called "Who Stole My Religion? Revitalizing Judaism and Applying Jewish Values to Help Heal Our Planet" and everything. So what exactly did you mean by the title of that paper and everything? Because definitely we've had conversations around the different aspects of Judaism.
2 points. First, I'm not a rabbi, but I've tried to study Jewish teachings on the environment and things. And it's not only a paper. There's a book, "Who Stole My Religion?" and the subtitle, "Revitalizing Judaism and Applying Jewish Values to Help Heal Our Imperiled Planet." Okay, so basically what I'm saying, and in that book, I try to argue that Judaism, and probably like other religions, is really a radical religion in the best sense of the term, with very powerful teachings on not only compassion for animals, but being co-workers with God and protecting the environment, seeking justice and peace, etc. And partly wrote that book partly because of the politics in the U.S., and I know you've been discussing that to some extent, but to me, the fact that recent survey indicates that among the Orthodox Jews who are the most involved in Judaism, ones that have had yeshiva education, etc. A recent survey indicated 73% of Orthodox Jews are supporting Donald Trump. And that's been so in the past. Jews mostly just the opposite, 75% support Biden and Democrats in general. So that is part of it. And part of it also is because there's so many powerful teachings in Judaism, other religions, on why people should be vegans or at least vegetarians in terms of health, compassion for animals, protecting the environment, serving natural resources. And the fact that so few Jews and other religious people are vegetarians and vegans, somehow it's like what one rabbi called religious behaviorism. People maybe observing the ritual and all, very fine, but not seeing how it's essential that Jewish and other religious values be applied today, because this is the number one threat. If we can't properly address climate change, and as I say, the UN Secretary General quoted a code red for humanity, the Intergovernmental Climate Panel on Climate Change, the number one group on climate change says in 2018, they indicated we may have only till 2030 to make what they call unprecedented changes in order to have a chance to avert a climate catastrophe. So that's some of the reasons I wrote that book, Who Stole My Religion?
Yeah, I bought both your books right now, Richard. So I went on Amazon. I learned this from Shaquille, who's not on right now, but he's from Australia. He's on a lot. He goes, why the people show up to our show, he buys the books on Amazon. So I started doing the same thing. So I bought both your books on Amazon. I pressed the little button and it comes. Patricia, I still haven't got my one question. Where in Florida are you at?
Tampa.
What you say?
South Tampa.
I'm actually
South
living.
Tampa?
Yeah.
That's my hometown. Where in South Tampa?
By Howard Street.
Oh, Howard Street. Okay, yeah, I know. You're near
Shore.
Hyde. Yeah, you're near the Hyde Park area. I was on San Nicholas. It was named after me.
Okay.
Yeah, my family was there from the 1800s. We're kind of
By
an
the way,
old,
Nick, just really quickly and everything. Richard, by the way, because they have some common ground, because like Patricia said, she is done some work in New York and all along those lines. But Richard is actually from New York and is a mathematician as well. So he is at the.
Where in New York? I go to New York all the time. I lived there for 5 years and worked there. Where in New York are you, Richard?
Okay. Well, I have to update you. I don't know if you have that. Last 7 years, believe it or not, I'm living now in Israel.
Oh, you're living in Israel.
You're living in Israel. Well, that's not New York.
Yeah.
That's on the other side of the
So,
pond.
yeah, I was originally Staten Island, New York. I
Staten
have
Island,
two
okay.
daughters, and I became the number one letter writer in the Jerusalem Post, trying to get out not only the vegetarian, vegan message, but trying to move Israel toward a more peaceful agenda. And also, what was it? Yesterday, had a letter there comparing the reaction of Biden to Donald Trump in terms of responding to the horrible massacre by Hamas, for example. So I'm in Israel and trying to get the message. But I wonder if the distinguished panel could comment on what you think. Do you agree that climate change is a major threat to humanity? And
this will be us if we're not careful. We'll be celebrating the Day of the Dead if we're not careful. You're dead on. I've worked with the community to help with saving the watershed for many, many years here in North Carolina. And the biggest problem we have are people with deep pockets who have no consideration whatsoever. And they'll come in onto the watershed and the forestation that we preserve, and they'll just strip it. And they'll come back and say, well, it was cheaper to strip all the trees. But what a lot of people don't understand is we cannot replace that tree that was removed because it was big and filtering, and the roots were filtering the water that was going into our water system, our filtration system. So the trees, they not only provide all the oxygen that we need, but they also provide the water we needed. And here in North Carolina, I'm so ashamed of our government for allowing it. I go to them and they go, well, there's nothing we could do about it because they already stripped it. And I go, well, we tried to stop them, short of tying ourselves to trees, which we're not allowed to do here. But they do. They'll go, okay, yeah, council, we'll do whatever you say. And then they come out and strip all the trees like they did across the street from my house, which had many, many trees that were over 200 years old over there, 73 acres. And they continue to do it. They come in and they go, oh, we didn't know about that law. And then we've got document after document where they came in and go, we're going to abide by those laws. And they don't. So they lie, cheat, steal, all for the sake of money. And yeah, this is our destiny because of people like what we've had in our city council here in Raleigh, North Carolina, because there will be no more clean water. And you can sit there and go, I'm crazy all you want and hate me for saying this, but it's the truth. And you know what? It's most of y'all's drinking water on this panel. It ain't mine, because mine, I have my own filtration system and I am not taking down my trees. So
that makes a lot of sense. Hey, Kim, just really quickly, I do have a quick question.
You're
I know
right,
that
Richard.
Sasha's getting ready to go off to do his show very shortly, and we're going to wrap up and everything. But how is it there, Richard, in Israel? You mentioned that you're in Israel. So as a voice from the view and seeing what's going on in Israel, what is your take on what is going on in terms of the kind of taking over back in the conflict with Hamas and everything? So I'm thinking that you're getting a direct feel from what is happening there in Israel. So if you can give us just maybe a sense of what is going on there.
Well, of course, there's tremendous concern. People are really shocked. It was such a failure. Israel was known for its intelligence and really involved in knowing what's going on. So people were really shocked by that, and people were very concerned. I myself thank God my immediate family is doing okay, but we have 3 grandsons who were called up among the, let's see, what was it? I think 36, tremendous number of people. Everybody here, I live here in a wonderful retirement village, and everybody here has grandchildren. And so, it's like, you probably know that saying, between a rock and a hard place, there's no easy answers. Everybody's concerned and shocked. And partly this was because, probably all aware, I think, 39 consecutive weeks there were demonstrations because the government was trying to really weaken the judicial system. People were taken to the streets. And that's sort of, many reservists said, well, we're just not going to serve. And there were many warnings that the army would not be prepared, and maybe that's what it encouraged Hamas to attack. So we just don't know.
Explain to me what you mean by many people were taken to the streets. What is that?
Well, there were 39 weeks of demonstrations because the government now in Israel is the most hard right, the most fundamentalist, the most religious, but not in the positive sense. And they were trying to weaken the judicial system, unlike the U.S. that has 2 houses of Congress and has states and all that. Whichever party has the most votes in the Knesset has the prime minister. So you really have the executive and legislative together. So the checks and balances is from the judicial system. So there were efforts to reduce that from as I said, the very far-right government, so that hundreds of thousands were demonstrating every week, and people many were thinking of even leaving the country, especially among the doctors and all. And as I said, many people who are on reserve said, if Israel is not going to be a democratic country, we are not going to be serving. There were warnings by the chief of staff and Prime Minister Netanyahu and others who were not listening. So all the division and what some thought was a weakening that may have encouraged Hamas to make that terrible, unbelievable attack. They say more Jews were killed on October 7th than any other day since the Holocaust. So that's an unfortunate reality.
I'm sorry to hear that. There should never be a strike like that, but sometimes, because I've been reading the stats from the UN, sometimes people's backs are pushed up against the wall and they have no other means, and they push back, and potentially the wrong way. I think Hamas could have used different tactics. But looking at the statistics, it appeared that the Palestinians were being killed routinely over the past few years at a very high rate as well. So, and the world kind of turned their head to it. There are other things, but it's interesting to hear the political turnabout there in Israel as well. I mean, we have our same issues here in the U.S. We tend to be one way or the other. We've never united in the past 30 years. I don't think we've united on anything other than 9/11. I think even the criminals all united during 9/11 and said, hey, we're not going to rob stores anymore. But and sometimes that's what it takes, is a strong common enemy to unite people. Has Israel united stronger since this happened? I mean, I hate asking that question.
Well, it's incredible. There was such polarization, and this definitely has united the country. When that kind of thing happens, and the images that people see, babies being killed, and I think, what is it, over 200 people taken as hostages. And that was such incredible negative things, children being killed in front of the parents and vice versa. So it's in my books, I've been arguing for a two-state solution and ending an occupation. Yeah. So I think hopefully that will happen. And that, by the way, there's a group in Israel called Commanders for Israel Security, and that's made up of hundreds of retired heads of the security forces, the military forces in Israel, who strongly oppose some of the things happening in the government. Unfortunately, I guess that's been a reality for the world. The people always saying, you did this to us, we're going to do that to you, taking revenge back and forth. You started it, and also somehow it has to end, and it just indicate Hamas did such terrible things. Now Israel is bombing, and again, unfortunately, many civilians being killed. Hopefully, I mean, they did provide a warning, but when you have 2 million people trying to move 1 million of them from the north to the south, it's not exactly easy. And
but do you think I don't think that warning was legit. I mean, come on, you got 24 hours to move your life, your family, or you're going to die. I mean, what would you do? I mean, what would I do in my home if somebody came up to me and said, you got 24 hours to move your ass, or we're going to blow it up? I was a little bit peeved at Israel for that. I don't think that was a nice way to handle it.
Well, it turns out to be more than a week.
It made them look like terrorists more than it made them look nice. I mean, I'm not mad at you. I know that you want peace. I know that the Palestinians want peace. I'm mad at the U.S. for butting their nose in when they shouldn't have. And when they made Israel a state, they should have all made Palestine their state. They should have set up the borders, and it would have dropped the contention. The contentions would have been softened.
Well, wait a minute. Actually, in the UN, there was a division for a Palestinian state, Israeli state, but how many different states attacked Israel, and in 1948, trying to destroy the state right at the start. So again, it's been a back and forth, and unfortunately, there's guilt or criticism to go around. But hopefully. I would hope that people would wake up and see, unless we can find common ground and solutions, and a two-state solution, and guaranteeing security to both sides, it's going to be an eternal battle. Somebody once said, "An eye for an eye means we're all going to be blind." So
Well,
there is a need.
their God, they're both gods. All their gods also said turn the other cheek, or was that Jesus? I don't know. But
Yeah.
the book says a lot of things, and all the books contradict themselves, and you utilize whatever phrase you want to promote whatever you're trying to promote. I see preachers do it all the time. I see leaders of all religions use certain phrases, copy paste, copy paste. But the only way that this is going to end is everyone to turn the other cheek and sit down and talk like humans and make the divisions and divide up the land and the borders, and you live on your land. And I mean, we've had feuds in our own country that have lasted as long.
Hey, Kim, just really quickly, I know we're winding down, definitely got the other show
Oh,
going
yeah.
on. But
Sorry about that. We are
Patricia,
now.
you're good. But Patricia, you were shaking your head, so I was just wondering, you had some thoughts around that division and all along that line, and the kind of the Israel and Arab division and all along those lines. So I did see you shaking your head at some of what was said, so I just wanted to hear your.
Yeah, I mean, it really goes back to history, and I mean, members of the communities that were marginalized in Eastern Europe and the Soviet Union, all those places, decided to make this a homeland. But what they forgot was that there were people there. And I mean, it's similar to what the Americans did to the Native Americans here.
Yes, it is.
They forgot there were people there. But what's happened is these people just didn't ever go away. So they've been systematically marginalized over the years. Their land has been taken, their houses have been bulldozed. I mean, we can go on and on about both sides and atrocities, but you can't have an exclusive state of one type of people and one type of religion anywhere in the world. And I think the Israelis have squandered a lot of the ability to have two-state solution. And because of the continued settlements in the West Bank, there's no way that's ever going to happen right now. And as Richard said, with the right-wing government, and it's gotten only more extreme since probably the 80s, you're never going to have anyone agree to that. So, and it's almost like here, parts of us are getting more and more extreme. Like, we can't teach this, we can't teach that, we have to ban these books, we have to do this. I mean, we really need to watch this because what happens is we're creating a situation that a lot of the marginalized people in the Jewish community were trying to avoid again. So we're almost circularly creating a genocide, which was a genocide, which is a genocide. And I think people are really starting to understand that, especially in the Jewish community. So they need to stand up and stop it. You can't say only these type of people can be in the world. It just doesn't.
Thank you. I think we needed to end that a long time ago. And like you said, a lot of this reminds me of what happened to our Native American Indians, which is another story. And we can continue that. But, Mark, you're right. We're at the
No, we got to wrap up. I just had one other quick question because I said I was going to ask her about it and everything earlier. But I know I hope both Richard and Patricia Gennaro will come back on the show whenever they're available. We do this show every Monday through Friday at 10 a.m. and everything. And we also have our World Politics on Tuesday and Thursday. So that'll be later on today at 5 p.m. So anytime that y'all are available, I may put y'all in the rotation and everything. And if you like to come on, I would love to have y'all come on and share your thoughts and all along those lines, because I definitely have enjoyed your insights, and anytime that you're available, same with you, Richard, as well. But I had said earlier that I was going to ask you a little bit, because the other issue that we talked about, and this could be a whole other show and everything, but if you could give your thoughts maybe very quickly around both Latin America and where we are with Latin American policy, and to some degree African policy as well. And like I said, Patricia, I'd love to hear your thoughts around that. And like I said, we can explore this further on some later shows, but if you can maybe just give us some quick insights.
Well, I think, it's the same. We still have to learn how to engage people and decide what kind of policy we want to implement. And, the Secretary of Transportation Pete Buttigieg has been repeatedly saying, I'm here to try to take the resources that I have and work with others to make life better. Okay, so I think that this is where we need to go in both of these instances. We are having so many players in the world right now. China and Iran and other people are moving forward economically economically. You don't see, China's not starting wars anywhere. So, I mean, now is that necessarily making people live better? We don't know yet, but we're not engaged at a global level enough to either, manage that so it does make people's lives better or help participate in that. And I think that's where we fall short.
Definitely agree with you on that and everything. Just really quickly as we wind up, and I'm going to put it on there, our little video that closes, that opened to as well, both Patricia and Richard. And I'll start with Richard first, gentleman first, and then Patricia. If you can tell how you can be reached, and if folks have any questions or comments to this show and everything along those lines, I'm sure that folks would be interested in that. So Richard, if you can tell folks how you can be reached, and definitely the same with you, Patricia, but I'll start with you, Richard.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, so I want to give my email address, and if people contact me, I'll be happy to send a PDF of this book and all. The issues are so critical that we have to solve the climate crisis. I'm willing to freely give complimentary copies of that book or other books, or many articles I've written on this. And if they contact me at veggierich@gmail.com, that's VEGGIERICH. You can see I built it even into my email address at gmail.com. Then I'll be happy to email that. And if anybody would like to join in, please contact me there too, because again, this is the most critical issue. That's why it's so tragic that Russia invented Ukraine, that we had the Hamas with an attack, and it goes back and forth, from the Holocaust, and then the Jews came to Israel, and hopefully it could have been a compromise and all, but it's unfortunately, it's been poor leadership, I think, in terms of Israel and in terms of the Palestinians, and hopefully we'll get better leaders that will realize that we just can't go on and keep with revenge, and some terrible things have been done on both sides of this show. So thanks again for the opportunity.
No problem. Patricia Gennaro, if you can tell how you can be reached, and definitely, like I said, I definitely love to have both of you on as well. We didn't mention it, but I know you've got publications as well. So if you want to mention those publications, that's also allowed also. But definitely, if you have any ways that you can be reached, any thoughts that you want to share, and like I said, y'all are
well, I thank you. I thank you all. This has been lovely. It's been a while since I've been able to have a really nice, logical conversation. So Mark, you know how to reach me, but you can also, I have a website at patriciadegennaro.com, and you can do that. And I'm easy to Google. So, and I would love to come back. You're all lovely. So thank you so much.
Please do. We would love to have both of you back. It's such an honor to have you, and thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you. Thank you for the opportunity.
Appreciate it. Take it easy.
See you guys tonight.
Yeah, if you like, you can come on World Politics. I'll send you that email as well.
Okay. Shalom from Israel. All the best, everybody. Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.